REWRITTEN! Epilogue! Stephen was nervous. Nervousness compelled his gem to cover him with the pink glow, which only spawned more nervousness. The cozy, peaceful look of the waiting room he was sitting in greatly contrasted the cold hailstorm that was pelting his thoughts. He thought the trip to the psychiatrist to get diagnosed had been bad, but this was torture, and it hadn't even started yet. The clock on the wall ticked away, each click of the second sending a cold, echoing tap through his chest. Tick, 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 tick. He could hear every breath that he took, each one short and measured, his throat tight and his mouth dry. He was sweating far more than what was necessary, a dense, chilling ball of heavy metal in place of his stomach, resting on top of a squirming knot of worms that had become his intestines. He was about as uncomfortable as that sounded. Tick, 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 tick. Stephen was staring at his swinging feet, his hands gripping the chair that he was sitting on, trying to will the pink hue away from him before his appointment began. He didn't want to cause any ruckus in there. If he hurt the therapist. It was fine, he told himself. He just needed to sit through those 50 minutes to make his family happy, without his gem overreacting to everything. He'd be out of here in no time. His glow only increased at this, causing him to make a stifled grunt of frustration, screwing his eyes shut and begging his gem in his thoughts, "Stop that! I'm literally just sitting in a chair! Calm down!" Tick, 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 tick. At a touch of his shoulder, his eyes snapped open again. His dad, who was sitting in a chair next to him, smiled in a concerned manner, asking him carefully, "You doing okay, Stubble?" No, Stephen thought to himself. I feel like I'm about to vomit, so my gem is sounding the alarm, and I don't want to be here, and my scales it, and I'm tired out of my mind, and I'm hungry, and everything hurts so bad, and can someone please stop that infernal clock ticking? Tick, 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 tick. Yeah, I'm fine, Stephen replied instead, a bit harsher than he meant to put it. He tried to make up for it by forcing his freaky fanged mouth to smile back. It might have looked more threatening than he wanted. After all his dad was doing for him, he didn't have the right to snap at him. His dad didn't look like he believed him. You sure? If you need anything, you can just ask. I'm fine, okay? Again, Stephen regretted his cross tone. Some part of him wanted to be mad at his dad, as if that would make him feel better. He shook his head, trying to get a hold of himself, mumbling timidly, "Sorry." "It's all right," his dad shrugged nonchalantly. "I'd be on edge too in your situation." Stephen still didn't feel like his apology was enough. His dad had been nothing but caring for him in the past weeks. He'd ask him if he was okay almost every 15 minutes, doing everything that he could to make his son as comfortable as possible, going out of his way to spend his time with him and talk with him. His dad was the best dad he could have hoped for. Stephen felt him squeeze his shoulder reassuringly, the spike scales still not seeming to bother him. "But don't worry," his dad told him. "The therapist isn't here to judge you. She's here to help you. It's her job." Stephen began to relax at his touch, feeling the hot pink glow slowly fade from him, the safety of his father countering the gnawing worry that was eating him up from the inside out. For now. He didn't want his dad to fuss over him. That wasn't the point of sheepishly asking him to come inside the waiting room in the first place. The last thing that Stephen wanted was for him to think that he was doing this for attention. He was just scared of doing this by himself. No matter how silly he felt, Stephen was glad that his dad had agreed to accompany him without further questions. He just needed someone to be there. The sound of the door opening drop-kicked him back to reality. He turned in time to see the previous patient exiting the room. They gasped whenever they caught sight of Stephen. They couldn't hide their surprise at his appearance. Stephen winced in embarrassment and averted his gaze, wishing that he didn't look like a half-lizard freak. His dad's hand tightened securely over his shoulder as he waved, trying to act as if his son was as normal as he was. The previous patient caught themselves quickly, looking regretful of their reaction, exiting the room fast without another glance. He knew that they couldn't help it. He didn't blame them for staring. It wasn't every day you saw a real-life monster. It was only a few heart-pounding minutes later before the door opened again, a lady poking her head out. "Next, please," she said, looking towards Stephen calmly. She was taller than him and had short, bouncy, dark hair with rectangular glasses. She looked nice, not flinching from him despite the blatant horns, scales, tusks, teeth, spikes. He knew that she had already been informed of his corruption incident. Well, everyone in Beach City knew about it, but she was told a bit more details beyond the rumors, learning about how it was caused by mental stress, as well as vague points about his pink outbursts. Most of it was simplified to, "Stephen is weird, so expect weird stuff." Luckily, she was one of the people who had fully accepted gems as a part of life, even having gem patients occasionally. So hopefully she would be the best choice for him. "The therapist isn't here to judge you. She's here to help you. It's her job." He repeated his dad's words in his thoughts, standing up gingerly. His body protested with the movement, the familiar sore biting returning. He realized, as he balanced, that his claw's vice-like grip on the chair had left cracked indents. He coughed and squeaked stupidly. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize..." She shook her head and said, "No, it's all right. These chairs go through a lot. Come with me." Still trying to think about where he could buy a replacement, Stephen slowly began to follow her, leaving his dad behind in the waiting room. Right before the door closed, he looked back to see the older man smile and give him an encouraging thumbs up. Stephen kept his head down as they walked down the carpeted hall, feeling like he was being marched to a court so they could analyze his faults and decide what his punishment was. Just thinking about a trial made him anxious. He shoved away the memories of Yellow and Blue's trial that he'd been put through whenever they still thought of him as Rose Quartz, the apparent shatterer of Pink Diamond. He noticed how the therapist was moving at a slow pace. He was glad for that, though. Simply walking like this was sending aching pains through him, and he didn't want to have to strain to keep up. He felt like a 90-year-old. They reached another door, entering and closing it behind them. Stephen glanced around the room, noticing that it had the same cozy feel to it. There was a circular table between a cushioned couch and a desk with neatly stacked papers on top of it. It wasn't small enough to be claustrophobic or big enough to be empty. It felt like a secret place, a safe one, not a courtroom. He guessed that was the intention, after all. What had he been expecting? Lava and spikes? But still, even though it wasn't meant to frighten him, he couldn't shake the underlying reason that he was here. He wasn't strong enough to deal with this by himself. What if something went wrong? What if she laughs and says that she can't help him and that he's going to be stuck like this forever? "Good morning. My name is Miss Ragoose. It's very nice to meet you." She was holding out her hand to shake his. Alarm clenched inside of him. Didn't she see the jagged talons that he had? What if he cut her? It would be rude to ignore her offer, and he'd been staring for too long to pretend like he hadn't seen it. Was it too late to act like he was blind, or deaf, or both? Deciding against it, Stephen slowly raised his hand, giving her enough time to see the danger and back down, but she, again, acted like nothing was wrong, waiting patiently. So Stephen reluctantly took her hand, not closing his fingers and just gently guiding them up and down with utmost care, like he was trying to shake her hand without touching it. He told her his name with an awkward crack to his raw voice. "Stephen." All of a sudden, his gem's intense heat washed over the rest of his body like it had lit up a floodgate, and he let go abruptly, looking down. Great, not even sitting down yet and he was glowing pink. Miss Ragoose had a slightly curious, deep-thinking look, gesturing him towards the couch while she walked behind the desk. Stephen sat down hastily, the tightened muscles and joints in his spine and legs practically weeping in relief to not be standing anymore. He kept his limbs close to himself, scared of touching anything like it would explode if he did, unable to settle properly and resigning to stare at his feet, claws ringing together, statue still. "Please, please, behave yourself," Stephen begged his gem in his head, not sure if it was listening or if it was too busy analyzing every possible threat in a 10-mile radius. It still talked to him a lot. They argued, even though they tried to agree on what was dangerous and what wasn't. He had decided on his feelings about his mom, but his issues of being afraid of his gem murdering everyone in sight were still going unchecked. He wished that he could summon back the feeling of contentment that he had whenever they refused. He wished that they could be that happy together again. His attention was brought back at the sound of a scratching pencil. She was already taking notes. Was it because of the weird handshake? The pencil stopped, and that was somehow worse than before, because now he could feel her eyes trained on him. Was he supposed to start them off? What would he even say? Where would he even begin? It all started the day I was born and stopped never. Now listen to me drone on about my sad life for 50 minutes. Stephen couldn't find his voice either way. It was like his throat had closed. If he did anything, his gem might do something unforgivable. What if he could just not say anything the whole session? That seemed preferable to telling her everything. The last time he opened up, a talking cactus had attacked him and spilled his secrets to his whole family. It was a long story, but he didn't really feel ready to risk that again. So Stephen sat there instead, wishing that he could melt into the floor, while Miss Ragoose watched, waiting. Finally, after enough time passed, he heard her make another short note with her pencil before saying, "You can tell me about whatever's bothering you. That's what I'm here for, of course. Everything that is said in this room stays in this room. I'm not going to laugh at you." Stephen wanted to say something, just to break out of the stubborn cobwebs that had strung themselves over his mouth. He stammered lopsidedly, feeling like he was throwing himself over a cliff. I can't... He shook his head hard, trying to align his jumbled thoughts, finally admitting, I don't know where to start. There's just so much. Do I just dump my whole life story, or skip to the worst parts, or explain what exactly led to... He pointed to his horns. This? Miss Ragoose shrugged and said, "You can start wherever you'd like. It doesn't have to be a story either. It can just be a feeling or an idea that you're preoccupied with. What's the most pressing thing you're thinking about right now? Stephen paused, trying to find a way to put his thoughts into words. He answered, I don't know. I guess I'm mostly just wishing my gem would stop making me glow. Miss Ragoose tilted her head. You don't do it voluntarily, correct? Stephen explained, It only makes me glow when I'm scared. He moved his hand over his stomach where he could feel the hard scales surrounding the warm gem. It thinks I'm in danger. But I'm not. I'm just sitting here talking to you. He didn't like the tighter hold that his gem took at that, a whisper of a phrase crossing his mind. This place is frightening you. I won't let anything happen to you. Before he could tell it about how nothing is gonna happen in the first place, he was brought back by Miss Ragoose's words. I notice how you talk about your gem as if it's a separate person from yourself. Tell me about that. Stephen shifted around, not sure how to put it. It's kinda hard to explain. It's all because I'm a hybrid. I have my mom's gem, so I kinda got a rebuilt version of her inside of me. It's not her, though. It never acts like it's her. More like an old friend of hers who promised to take care of me or something. Miss Ragoose nodded in understanding and questioned him gently. If you don't mind me asking, how has you and your gem's relationship been over your lifetime? Has it always been overprotective? Stephen shrugged. I never actually heard it at all whenever I was a kid. It was just like another limb before, not another person. Do you remember when it began to gain sentience? He knew when. The cold cave water that trickled down his throat made goosebumps sprout up over his skin. The glow increased steadily. The first time it was, he said slowly, fighting back flashes of white behind his eyelids. Did she want him to describe it? Please don't make me describe it, he begged silently in his head. It was what? Miss Ragoose asked gently. Are you willing to share? The memory was pushing at his mouth, gushing over his vision in a mess. His hands were pressing up against his belly, afraid of his gem falling out of him. It's time to come out, Pink, a maliciously pleasant voice chimed. He felt her giant, blazing white fingers closing around his body, squeezing him, trapping him. No, I'm... Stephen couldn't finish his sentence, feeling the need to take every breath that he could muster rather than talk. The room felt too small now, as if the walls and ceiling were constricting down onto him, a giant pale hand closing over his body to hold him down. He looked towards Miss Ragoose and then the door, his heart pounding wildly. He knew that his gem was preparing what it thought was a defense. He knew that this would go badly. He knew that he'd hurt the therapist and corrupt again, and... Stephen, listen to me. Miss Ragoose's voice was at the other end of a tunnel. You don't have to tell me right now if you don't want to. I need you to take deep breaths of me. With that, she led him through the process that he'd grown used to over the last few days, the same one his family members had to learn. Breathing in, breathing out, counting backwards from 10, describing the sofa's texture, his shirt's texture, the floor's texture, gradually making it back down out of the storm onto solid ground. He never stopped glowing, but it lessened to a reasonably normal pulsing. When he could think without being disturbed with memories of blood pouring from his gut, he was relieved to realize that he hadn't obliterated everything in the room. Miss Ragoose seemed proud as she told him, Good job, Stephen. See? You were able to stop it. It didn't seem that big of a victory for him. If he was getting better, it wouldn't have started in the first place. All he did was think about it. That didn't warrant such an overreaction. He just felt ashamed that he put her in danger. Miss Ragoose waited only a little while longer before asking him cautiously, Do you know what just happened to you? Stephen shrugged uneasily. Just bad memories. Flashbacks, Miss Ragoose nodded. A common symptom of trauma victims. Do you get things like this often? Stephen felt ashamed as he replied, Yeah, mostly that one, with White Diamond. He looked back up at her. My gem always acts up whenever that happens. I don't want it to hurt anyone just because I get scared. How do I stop it from panicking like that? Miss Ragoose considered that and then answered, Doing the anchoring techniques we were trying before usually helps. It lets your mind know that you're now, not then. But usually, to stop them all together, or at least to lessen their numbers, you can try to cope with the fears by talking to somebody about them, letting your family know whenever it happens, and trying to find ways to lie the issue to rest. I understand that White Diamond harmed you somehow, and she is a gem family member of yours? Stephen sighed, but nodded. Miss Ragoose suggested, Maybe you could try talking to her about it. If you could teach yourself that she's never going to do whatever it was to you again, maybe eventually you'll learn to trust her and be more comfortable in her presence. Of course, you don't need to force all of it at once, and don't expect to feel fine after one conversation. But over time, it might get better if you let some forgiveness flow between you two. The idea of talking to White Diamond about what she did was unnerving. But Stephen nodded again, making a note in the back of his head to at least try it. Once he works up the courage, that is. He looked up again as she said, Do you want to talk to me about exactly what she did to you, or is that still too private? Stephen's arm shifted over his middle again, uncertain. He was worried about panicking again, and out of all the things that happened to him whenever he was little, that one was the worst. He shook his head and said, "I'd rather not. I can talk about other stuff, though, if you want. I've got plenty of near-death stories." "If you would like to speak with me about them, you can," Miss Argus said, "but don't feel obligated to share everything with me. It's not for my entertainment, it's for your release. Normally, it would be easier to unload everything into the open, but judging by your past, almost everything in your daily life terrifies you, and it's going to take a very different approach to cope with it all. There's not one object or place to focus on. It's everything." He guessed that she was right. This wasn't just one experience whenever he was younger, it was his whole life up until now. It would be impossible to hone in on just one memory. They'd have to lessen the fear with all of them, all at once. "The best thing I'd count on is to make sure to stay grounded and to ask for help if you need it," Miss Argus continued. "If any specific fear arises, we can address it, but for now, it's an umbrella topic where we mostly have to focus on lowering the anxiety that comes with all of it." Stephen nodded once more to let her know that he understood. This would be difficult, and he hoped that she'd know how to help him along with this. "So do you have any specific memories that you need to unload?" Miss Argus asked. "I can listen to anything." Stephen paused, shifting around. He looked down at his shirt, knowing that his gem was right beneath it, humming with its defensive magic. It didn't want him to talk about it, and frankly, he didn't either. Not yet. "Sorry, I just don't think I'm ready. I want to talk about something else now," Stephen said quickly. Miss Argus leaned back in understanding, not prodding an inch further. She quickly diverted his attention back to the previous topic, his gem and its sentience. "So after that experience, your gem gained its own mind?" she asked. Stephen sighed, still feeling tingly from what just almost happened, wondering why she was so calm about it. He said, "Not immediately, but it was like since the line between us had already been broken, now it was impossible to fix back up perfectly again. It's like a scar. Over time, it started to gain its own will until the vague emotions that I was getting from it became words in my head, and now it won't listen to me at all." He frowned down at himself and explained, "I don't like it when it tries to protect me. It always happens whenever I remember something bad or if something freaky is happening. It wanted to attack you a few minutes ago just because I was remembering something that had nothing to do with you." He was scratching at his reptilian arms, frustrated with the aggressive color that was shining from it. "I'm really sorry." Mr. Argus nodded and said, "It's all right. It's good that you're telling me this." She was writing stuff down again, a conclusive look forming on her features. "Have you ever managed to stop your gem from doing things that you don't want it to do?" He thought back, though what he came up with was mostly filled with shouting at himself. He said, "A few times, I guess." "How do you do it?" He felt the scales around his gem clench worriedly. It didn't like him to say anything about what it considered to be failures. He explained, just to spite it, "I yell at it." He realized how mean that sounded of him, trying, It won't listen to me. I have to do something to stop it before—" She waved down his hurried excuse and asked, "Does it always work to yell?" "This one was easy." "Nope," he grumbled. "Why do you think it doesn't work?" she questioned. That one wasn't easy. He knew what she wanted him to say, but saying it made him feel like a hypocrite. Still, he told her, "It's because yelling doesn't help. Arguing about it doesn't solve the problem." He felt like his own mouth was betraying him, shame coming from every syllable. That was all the stuff that he told the gems whenever he was younger. It was the methods that he used almost daily to solve their conflicts and fix all their problems without fighting. But why couldn't he follow his own advice now? Why had he gotten so bad at this, to where he put everyone in danger? "It's good you already know that," Miss Argus said as she marked down another bullet point. "So, that being said, how do you think that you should restrain your gem next time?" Again, he knew what she wanted him to say, but something was still bothering him about that answer, something that he couldn't let slip by. But what if it doesn't work?" Stephen began in a rush. "What if it blows up anyway and hurts someone again? I can't risk that. I'm not good at this stuff anymore." His words broke off as frustration threatened to power his words into a glass-shattering echo. He tried to keep his voice down, struggling against his own magic as he said, "When I was a kid, I would have been able to fix this, but now that I'm older, I can't. Why can't I do this?" Miss Ragus watched him, a saddened but not hopeless expression in her dark eyes. She said, "You experienced a lot of trauma early on in life. PTSD isn't just trauma that happens in the moment. It's how it sticks with you and follows you into adulthood, affecting your everyday life. Simply because you aren't experiencing those dangers anymore doesn't mean that you aren't being affected by them. Everything piling up later would naturally make it harder to do things like you used to whenever there was less of it and more distractions. Remember, your inability to fix yourself isn't caused by your own failure. It's because of the different ways your body learned to react to things over the years. It is fixable, but not by blaming yourself and fighting yourself, but instead by locating what causes the fears and learning how to cope with them. Letting them control you is the only way that you could fail. It seems harder to do now because of everything that's already happened, but it may become easier with healing. She leaned back, marking something else down as he watched, listening intently. She continued, "But just because you've fallen out of touch doesn't mean that you can't try to unlearn these new aggressive habits and reactions that you've had to adapt to before. You will get better, you just need to try. It won't happen all at once, but it will happen, as long as you keep taking these baby steps towards normalcy. What do you think the first step would be?" His gaze flicked down to where his gem was hidden under his shirt. The pink light was thrumming lowly, prepared to pounce up again at a moment's notice. "I probably need to talk to my gem and figure out how to calm it down, without getting mad and causing a big fight," he answered, looking back up at her as she nodded approvingly, a sweet smile on her face. "That seems right to me," Miss Ragoose told him. Then, before anything else could be said, she checked a watch on her wrist and told him as she began to stand up from her chair. "All right, Stephen, our 50 minutes are up. I'd say we did good today." Stephen agreed nervously, suddenly feeling stirred up. It was over? Already? "But he stammered over his words, not knowing where they were going in the first place. He didn't want to get up. Maybe they could sit here forever and fix every single thing about him. He wanted to get better now. He wanted to rip the scales off of his skin and be normal again already. Miss Ragoose seemed to sense the lingering loose ends and said reassuringly, "You'll see me again soon, don't worry. Same time, same place, next week on the same day. We have to do this slowly, but I promise that eventually those scars will reduce enough to let you live." Stephen knew that he had to go. He stood up with her and said, I really hope you're right." "Just remember what I said, and I will be," Miss Ragoose replied easily, holding up her hand to shake his again. As he was reaching slowly, he glanced down with a start. His skin wasn't pink anymore. He took her hand, shook it, and looked up at her with the first real smile he'd given in weeks. All in all, he left that office feeling slightly lighter than whenever he'd come in. Not happy and free just yet, but a little better. At least he had a plan now. He was just nervous if it would actually work. If it didn't... He tried not to think about that as he met his father in the waiting room again, receiving a worried hug before being helped out the door and into the car again. The door shut, and his dad didn't probe him, which he was glad about. He just drove him home, the only questions being if he was okay and if he wanted to stop for lunch on the way. He said yes to both. That night, whether it be the pills or Miss Ragoose's words, or both, Stephen slept without a single nightmare. He'd get better. Not soon, but not never.